at a Roger Waters concert. She may be checking in, but I'm so glad to be here with Massachusetts Peace Action co-hosts Cole Harrison and Mary Ellen Koukalos. Tonight, we are looking at $858 billion for ecocide, okay? This is the military budget that's going to hit the Senate floor. We're going to hear from two experts with the National Priorities Project, Lindsay Koshgarian and Ashik Siddique. Before that, however, we're going to give a few updates. So I'll turn it over to you, Cole.
Thank you, Marcy, and it's good to be with you tonight. Just since the last time CODEPINK Congress has met, we have had visits to Taiwan by both House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and then this week by Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey, and each one has led a congressional delegation. Really, the United States should not be a party to the issues between China and Taiwan. Our role should be to insist that these problems be resolved peacefully. The One China policy that the United States adopted way back in 1972 dictates that the United States does not have formal political relations with Taiwan, but only economic and cultural ones. But unfortunately, the Biden administration is undermining the One China policy. It has removed from the State Department website statements that the U.S. does not support independence for Taiwan, and has removed a statement that Taiwan is part of China. This is surely very alarming to China, and so we need to call this. Senator Markey should reaffirm the United States One China policy, should speak out against escalation with China, should support diplomacy, oppose new arms shipments to Taiwan, and speak out against provocative military exercises and bases near China.
And we're going to take action on that later on in the call.
We have an action page. And I just want to say one more point is that we cannot afford to divide the world into camps or to pursue another struggle between great powers for supremacy. This thinking has no place in the 21st century. We cannot defeat imminent climate catastrophe or prepare for health threats like the COVID-19 pandemic without cooperation between the US and China. And to be fair, Senator Markey's words are more conciliatory than those of Pelosi, right? So he is talking about preserving the status quo and, making the US and Chinese military, have deconfliction hotlines and things that could reduce tensions. So within the Democratic camp, he is a relative peacemaker compared to Pelosi, but it's still problematic for US senators to go to Taiwan, given the tense situations.
Thank you, Cole. And just to clarify, so you're saying the State Department removed references to the One China policy?
Yes, well, it didn't remove reference to the One China policy, but two of the specific points within it removed those details.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes. And CODEPINK was a sponsor, along with Pivot to Peace and Veterans for Peace, of a rally, a protest that was held in San Francisco on the eve of Speaker Pelosi's visit. We have video of that, and I wrote an article on it for Consortium News, which we can put in the chat. And at this point, I just want to thank our CODEPINK staffers, Shayla Bao and Maha Khan, who are with us tonight and helping us navigate all of this. So thank you for that. Okay, Mary Ellen, let us know what's happening in Afghanistan.
Yes, so really important with so much going on in the world. It is important to remind our fellow citizens to understand that the situation in Afghanistan is a dire one. The International Red Cross just issued a report on the humanitarian crisis there. And they're saying that the paralyzed banking system is having a terrible, devastating effect on the people of that country. And this is certainly something of our own doing. As reported in the Wall Street Journal, because of the recent killing of al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri in Kabul, the US is no longer willing to consider the release of the frozen central bank funds of that country, and in fact has suspended talks with the Taliban, alleging that they are supporting terrorism. So it's not enough that the US has occupied that country, killing tens of thousands, likely more, of innocent Afghans over the 20-year occupation. But now, according to the IRC, we've got 95% of Afghans facing hunger. That will certainly most directly affect women and girls. So we are starving the country because the US refuses to release the $7 billion in those central bank funds. And it's just cynical and ironic that the US once pivoted to the notion that we were occupying the country because of some responsibility to protect the women and girls from the oppressive Taliban regime. And now we are making that the devastated country, the situation there, much, much worse. And we are apparently very concerned about those funds being released to terrorist groups, money that belongs to the people of Afghanistan. And as always, the terrorist designation depends on whether the groups or individuals are clients of the US or not. So that is unfortunately the situation. And will we be having an action related to Afghanistan later?
Well, not specifically tonight, though, of course, we urge everybody to send an email to the White House.
Absolutely.
Expressing outrage over this theft. It's really nothing less than theft of billions of dollars from Afghanistan, from the people of Afghanistan, who, as you said, 95% are facing starvation. And we have in the chat, or we will shortly, a link to an op-ed that Medea Benjamin wrote, was published in The Hill, read widely on The Hill, saying, look, we may not approve of the Taliban's policies toward women, we don't, but look at what could happen if there is complete collapse of Afghanistan. It could be a lot worse. It could be ISIS, So do check that out. Now, at this point, thank you, Mary Ellen. I'm going to just give us a quick update on Ukraine. We have a Peace in Ukraine coalition that we have organized, and I invite all of you who are on this call to join us. You can send an email to Maha, M-A-H-A, at codepink.org. She'll put her email in the chat. Say that you want to get on the listserv. We'll be meeting tomorrow. And we have, several organizations who are active in the coalition. Our unifying principles are: we want a ceasefire now. We want negotiations, not escalation. We want billions for climate, for healthcare, for housing, not for more weapons. CBS reported recently that only about 30% of the weapons, the billions that we have spent on weapons, those weapons are only about 30% are reaching the front line. So where are the rest going, right? There's like a whole underground economy of armaments. This is not the answer. We know that. Right now in Ukraine, there's a lot of concern over a nuclear plant. IAEA inspectors want to go in. There's been shelling. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians say it was them who shelled the plant, but it's a very tense situation. And now more than ever, we need Biden to get on the phone. We need Blinken to meet with Lavrov, not just about prisoners, but about reaching some sort of resolution and not a proxy war, a protracted proxy war in Ukraine. So at this point, I want to take you to our Peace in Ukraine website and just give you a peek at what we're up to here. Maha or Shay will share the screen with us, and note that we have planned, and Cole and Mary Ellen are very much a part of this. They're part of the coalition. We have planned a September week of action from the 12th through the 15th. And here we go. So if you go to peaceinukraine.org, you will see this on the homepage. And if we scroll down, we'll just take a look at what we're up to here. Monday, September 12th. We can click on that. There are the main demands. We have one-click items you can share with friends, share on social media. You can call your Congress members, your senators, your House reps, and say, hey, enough. Biden just sent another billion. He bypassed Congress on weapons to Ukraine. We have another billion in the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, the military budget that we'll be looking at closely tonight. So we know this is not the answer. We don't know where these weapons are going, and it just keeps escalating, right? And it's a very frightening situation to have a proxy war, as we know, between two nuclear armed nations. Okay, let's go to Tuesday, the 13th. What have we got planned? Tuesday, the 13th. All right. That's when we are going to be contacting the White House and the State Department with emails saying very similar things as we mentioned earlier. Directly engage with Russia, because you know what? Yes, it's up to the Ukrainians, their fate. However, we know that this war would not continue without US and NATO weaponry. We would have reached a negotiated settlement a long time ago. Let's go to Wednesday, September 14th. What's happening Wednesday, September 14th? We are going to suggest to the media that they end this parade of military pundits and generals who talk about war games. We want guests who have a vision for peace, for a resolution, for a return to some of the principles in the Minsk II agreements. So you can see we're suggesting Medea, Nicholas Davies, who she writes with. We're suggesting Ann Wright, Colonel Ann Wright. She's retired. She was a diplomat. Jeffrey Sachs, economist. He's been very outspoken. Strong advocate for negotiations. John Quigley, I interviewed him for CODEPINK Radio. He was a former negotiator in Crimea. Katrina vanden Heuvel, publisher of The Nation magazine. Norman Solomon, co-founder Roots Action. David Swanson, executive director, World Beyond War. Give them a platform. Okay, and we will be giving you on this site avenues to contact these networks, people to contact at these networks. Okay, the last day of this week of action is a day to organize delegations inside and outside your Congress members' offices. So we want rallies outside, protests, direct action. Kudos to Veterans for Peace, Jim Driscoll. He's been organizing direct actions in Maryland where veterans are getting arrested. Their banners say, "Stop the war, save the climate," because we know that militarism fuels climate catastrophe. So I'm going to ask our staffers, thank you so much, to put in the chat, if you can, a link to a Google form that I created. I'm going to ask all of you to step up to organize either a delegation to meet with a staffer or a Congress member, or a rally, a protest, something outside of your Congress member's office. So if you could seriously consider that, that would be terrific. And if you can't find the form, you can always just contact me. I'll put my name in the chat. Marcy@codepink.org. Okay, let's go now to an introduction. There we go. There's the Google form. I'm going to check back and see how many have signed the Google form. Sign up, please do. Right now, we're going to introduce our guests. So, Cole, take it away. Oh, is it Cole? I'm sorry.
Oh, it's supposed to be Mary Ellen, isn't it?
Mary Ellen. Okay, Mary Ellen.
No problem. So yes, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. It is my great pleasure to introduce Lindsay Koshgarian. Lindsay is the program director of the National Priorities Project, where she focuses on military spending. Prior to joining NPP in 2014, Lindsay was a researcher at UMass at the Donahue Institute at University of Massachusetts. She holds a Master of Public Policy from UCLA and a BA in Physics from UPenn. And I just want to give a little shout out to National Priorities, nationalpriorities.org. It is just an indispensable resource for those of us who are organizing to make people know what's happening with the Pentagon spending, eating up all of our tax dollars. So take it away, Lindsay.
Thanks so much, Mary Ellen. And thanks for your earlier comments. And Cole and Marcy, thanks for your comments too. And thanks to CODEPINK for hosting this tonight. So we were asked to come here, Ashik, my colleague Ashik and I, to talk about the National Defense Authorization Act, which, as you probably know, is one of two main vehicles, legislative vehicles for Pentagon spending. There's the National Defense Authorization Act that sets Pentagon spending and also Pentagon policy, which we'll talk about some. And then there's the appropriations process, which sets spending for everything, but is also a necessary part of setting Pentagon spending. We're going to focus tonight on the National Defense Authorization Act and specifically on what's going to be happening in the Senate but I'm going to reference the House process quite a bit because the way that the House and Senate versions play off of each other is an important part of how this could work out. So first of all, I just want to point out that we are in a time of rising military spending. We've seen spending go up the last couple of years. When we transitioned from the Trump administration, where spending skyrocketed, to the Biden administration, we did not see spending go down. And when Biden pulled the last troops out of Afghanistan, ending a 20-year war in that country, we also did not see spending go down. And this is the first time on the record where the US ended a major war and did not see any reduction in Pentagon spending. It's the first time. All of the other major wars, we've seen the Pentagon budget go down after that. And I think it's important to keep reminding people of that we just got out of this very unpopular 20-year war, and that we don't want more of that. We don't want more of that policy. We need a different policy. So I think that's an important piece of context. So speaking of where we are now, this year's military budget, fiscal year 2022 that we're in the middle of, is $782 billion. That includes the Department of Defense, it includes the nuclear weapons at the Department of Energy, and it includes some other things. So that's kind of where we are today, right now. President Biden, in his budget request for next year, fiscal year 2023, that begins on October 1st, he requested an $813 billion budget, so about a $30 billion increase. So already we're headed in the wrong direction. That, by the way, that budget request that Biden made for this next year is about $200 billion higher than the last Obama request. $200 billion higher than the last Obama request. Obama's last request was just over $600 billion, and this is over $800 billion. It's a huge difference. It's also $70 billion higher than the last Trump request. So it's a very, very high dollar amount. It just keeps going higher. And Congress now is poised to add to it. We have seen the House vote on a version of this bill, of this legislation, that adds $37 billion to the Biden amount. And right now the Senate has before it a version of this legislation that adds $45 billion to the Biden amount. So both the House and the Senate are looking at adding quite a bit of money to what Biden requested. And Ashik will talk a little bit more about how that has played out so far. So the House has passed a version of this bill. The Senate has not passed a version of this bill, but they have a version that came out of the Senate Armed Services Committee. So they have a version, but they haven't passed theirs. So what we're looking forward to is whether the Senate passes their version, and ultimately what we're really looking forward to is that the House and the Senate will reconcile their different versions and come up with a final piece of legislation. And that's where we want to look for opportunities for where we might get a chance to make our voices heard about that. So I was asked to speak about a list of things. It's not a particularly short list, so I'm going to try to go through quickly, and maybe we'll be able to get in deeper when we get to the Q&A part of this. So I've already talked a little bit about the entire dollar amount, and that's being justified in the rhetoric based on really three things. There's inflation, which is a big arguing point right now for hawks who want a higher Pentagon budget. There is Ukraine, of course, and there's also China, which is something that they're really focused heavily on. So those are the three things that are in the rhetoric. The fourth thing that's not in the rhetoric, but is very much in the room, is job creation, because Congress loves nothing more than using the Pentagon budget as a job creation program. So those are the things that are kind of at play in making the spending go higher. So I'll talk about a few specific programs. First of all, on nuclear weapons. The Biden administration has bought in pretty completely to sorry, I'm just noticing our unwanted guest there. Thank you. So the Biden administration has bought in pretty completely to the Trump and before that the Obama idea of nuclear modernization, which is reinvesting in nuclear weapons for a new century, which is a terrible idea, likely to cost possibly around $2 trillion over time. They're moving forward with that. The House version of the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, adds less than $1 billion to the Biden request, and the Senate NDAA looks similar so far on its path. So they're not adding a lot to the Biden request, but it was already high. It was already doing going full speed ahead with the nuclear modernization plans. A couple of specific things that we were watching because the Biden budget actually requested to cut them. And so that looked like an opportunity that if the Biden administration and the Pentagon were requesting to cut funding, that maybe that might be something Congress might be more willing to do. Yes, I say yes, there's a comment here that nuclear weapons were under the Department of Energy. That is true. And I say Pentagon, and I say it a bit loosely to describe the entire enterprise, including the Department of Energy, partly because I certainly don't want to call it defense. And so when I say Pentagon, I mean sort of the whole thing. So there were a couple of things we were looking at in the hopes that Congress might follow through on the Biden proposal to cut them. One is the B-83 gravity bomb, which is an old school, very powerful nuclear weapon, tens of times more powerful than what was used in Hiroshima. It's definitely a weapon that we should not have in our arsenal. And it had been retired, and then Trump revived it. And then Biden suggested retiring it again. And the Senate right now, Bill, requests a report before it can be retired. So essentially they're saying, no, you can't retire it yet. So that's a step in the wrong direction from the Biden proposal. Another nuclear thing that we have been keeping an eye on is what's called the Sea-Launched Cruise Missile nuclear. And this is a nuclear missile platform that is particularly dangerous because it can be a platform for either conventional or for nuclear weapons. And so whoever's on the receiving end of that aggression doesn't know whether what's headed their way is a conventional weapon or a nuclear weapon, which could lead to easily accelerating into a nuclear war that nobody intended. So that's another thing we've been watching. On that, the House and the Senate NDAA versions that we have so far both would keep that program going. But there's a House Appropriations bill, because remember, there are two sort of parallel tracks here. There's the NDAA and then there's appropriations. The House Appropriations bill actually keeps that cut. So there is some precedent there for keeping that cut, and that might be something that's still worth fighting for. Then another one that I was asked to talk about is the F-35. And this is actually, there's like a tiny sliver of good news here, which is that the Biden administration requested to cut the number of new F-35s purchased by about a third, from 94 to 61. Now, the House and the Senate have both put some planes back in those, added to that request, but they haven't gone anywhere near the 90s that we've been in every year recently. So the House has added 3 F-35s back. The Senate has added 7 F-35s back. At worst, that puts us at 68 new F-35 jet fighters, as opposed to the 94 where we were before. So that's something to fight for, is to keep as much of that reduction as possible. And promising that the House and Senate, neither one of them went all the way back and put all the F-35 jet fighters back. The last thing, and I know that I'm going a bit over time, the last thing here is what's something called the 1202 program. It's a part of this legislation. It's very small. It's what is referred to as irregular warfare. And what it basically means is that the US will pay for other forces to do the fighting that we aren't going to do ourselves. Now, we already do that in a sense of military aid and things like that, but this is a more direct. And And so far, it has only been used for intelligence capacities. It hasn't been used for actual combat, as far as we know, but it could be, and it can be. And so it's a really dangerous thing where the US has this whole new mechanism to engage in proxy war and skirt even more than presidents have already been skirting the need for the authorization for the use of military force for Congress's war powers. So it's a very, very pernicious. It's not something that we, would want to see established as ongoing policy. The House and the Senate NDAA versions, as they are now, both codify that further and give it a little bit more funding. It's not a high amount of funding. It's only about $15 to $25 million. So we're not talking about a big amount of money, but the precedent and the authority to do this is what's really dangerous about this. So that's another thing that we want to see. Representative Sarah Jacobs had an amendment that passed that was added to the House NDAA that would at least require that financing not be given to human rights abusers. And of course, it's questionable how you could enforce something like that. But she's also introduced a standalone legislation to do the same thing. And that's certainly something that's worthwhile. Although, what we really need is Congress to have war powers back and not provide even more mechanisms for presidents to engage in unapproved warfare. So that is everything I was asked to cover. I'm going to hand it over to Ashik.
All right. And before Ashik speaks, I'd just like to give him a proper introduction. Ashik, thank you so much, Lindsay Koshgarian, for that overview of some of the worst of the worst in the NDAA for 2023. Next is Ashik Siddique. He is a research analyst for the National Priorities Project. Prior to joining that project, Ashik was the research and digital communications lead of the Climate Mobilization and worked for several years as a research coordinator of a study on PTSD in combat veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan at the Bronx VA Medical Center. Welcome, Ashik.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. So I will follow up on everything Lindsay laid out to talk a little bit about some of the next steps in the Senate, and then going forward, what maybe to expect and places where it could still be impactful for people to make their voices heard. So just to recap the timing a little bit, this June, several months ago, is when the Senate Armed Services Committee voted to tack on an additional $45 billion onto President Biden's proposed national military budget, which raised the top line figure to a massive $847 billion. And then the House passed its version in mid-July with strong bipartisan backing, which authorized $840 billion. So pretty close to the Senate amount. And that was after what Lindsay laid out, sifting through hundreds of amendments, many hours of debate, and that passed 329 to 101. So that's a pretty strong margin. And the next step is to be brought to the Senate floor. So several days after the House version passed in mid-July, the Senate Armed Services Committee released its version of the bill text for the Senate version, which is number 44543. So that, as I said, lays out $847 billion. So the timeline and dates are still to be decided for when exactly that's going to be debated. The most optimistic estimate is that they take it up on the floor in September, so next month. And typically, once the Senate votes on its version of a bill, then legislators will hash out the differences between the House and Senate versions in conference committee to reconcile the differences. And then that version is what passes in the final bill and reaches the president to sign off on. So this time around, it's possible that the Senate may not even vote on the Senate Armed Services Committee version, but on a conference version that's just worked out behind closed doors, basically, to make it easier to reconcile with the House version. So that's still to be decided, but either way, the Senate is unlikely to take up its version of the NDA with an amendments process the way that the House had. So all that said, after the authorization finally passes, then the authorization is what decides the overall funding amounts for the NDAA. and then the actual appropriations process begins for that funding. And that appropriations process is still also to be decided, and that's the process that's pretty tough to influence from the outside, since most of the big work on it has already happened by the time it's up for debate. It's a much harder process to get in on from the outside if you're not a lobbyist or something. So that's why it's important for people to make your voices heard while the authorization is still up for debate. I'll say a little bit about where the baseline is for votes against the NDAA. That usually, well, I mean, the best indicator of that is who votes against it in previous years. They're usually pretty reliable to vote against it again. And this year, as Lindsay said a bit about in the House, there were two major amendments to try to cut down on the overall spending amount. So one amendment, which would have cut the $840 billion authorized by the House version down by $100 billion. That was a proposal presented by California Democrat Representative Barbara Lee, as well as Mark Pocan from Wisconsin. So that amendment to cut down by $100 billion was defeated 78 to 350. So there were 78 members of Congress who voted for that $100 billion cut, but then obviously there were way more who did not support that. There was another amendment to cut down a smaller amount that would have subtracted the nearly $37 billion that the House added on top of Biden's request. So that actually did a bit better. It was still defeated, but the margin of defeat was slimmer. It was 151 to 277. So there were 151 people in the House who are at least willing to vote against an additional increase. So about 150 votes is the baseline out of 435 members of Congress. And in previous years, there are some other reps also who have signed letters or voted on previous amendments to cut the Pentagon. So that's, if you count those, there's about 175 sitting members of the House who have demonstrated that they have the potential to be pressured to vote against higher military budgets. In the Senate, the picture is a bit bleaker by the time it gets to the Senate. Usually, just based on the current balance of powers, it's much harder to fight. In the Senate last year, the NDAA passed 88 to 11. So there's 100 senators. The 11 no votes were 3 Republicans, 7 Democrats, and 1 independent, Bernie Sanders. So the House, based on the current regimen of powers, is where the big fight happens, where it's at least for the past year been more impactful for people to influence, but still by the time it gets to the Senate, that's still a major, that's what finally signs off on it. So it's still really important for people to make your voices heard. Overall, we have more power to build to get to a place of actually winning. Right now, the fight is really just about trying to increase the margins, pressure a few more people to sign on and keep building the floor of who's willing to vote against higher military budgets. But ultimately, we need more progressives on the House Armed Services Committee, or people who are willing to, to put a lid on it. But the House vote this year was a confirmation of the strategy and theory of change of the People Over Pentagon Coalition that our organizations are part of. To keep forcing votes, to keep growing the People Over Pentagon Coalition, and keep applying pressure to continue adding to the numbers of members who are willing to go on the record to oppose these massive levels of military spending. And this year, especially, many outside groups across many sectors weighed in as part of the fight. There were climate organizations, immigration organizations that are typically focused more on economic inequality and poverty that were willing to come out on the record saying higher military budgets are bad because they intersect with our issues, our primary fights, and there's just a need to rebalance resources in this country. So the diversity of issue areas pushing to put people over the Pentagon had an impact, according to many Hill staffers who heard from people in our coalition. And beyond the summer, the coalition is still shoring up more champions to try to continue bold action and get even more deeply engaged, not just to engage during the few months when the NDA is up for debate, but to try to figure out how to weave it into what they're doing all year. And a lot of groups that have participated commented on the camaraderie, productive partnerships that emerged from this experience, and how a lot of organizations were able to do more by dividing and sharing the workload. Like National Priorities Project, our lane is kind of analyzing the budget and breaking it down for partners, and then other organizations do the work of spreading it. So this year it felt like there was a really productive network of orgs distributing that work. So one more thing, the midterms are coming up, the midterm elections in November. That could have some kind of effect on all this. There's definitely going to be a lot of pressure, as Lindsay said, to pass this NDA quickly for reasons like fear mongering about China and Russia, and especially after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and what seem to be tensions escalating between the U.S. and China. All of these will make it hard to resist for members of Congress, on top of all the funding that will pour into many congressional districts during an ongoing economic crisis, and these will that funding will be seen as stimulating in this economy. So there are a lot of pressures on lawmakers to just pass bigger and bigger military budgets. And since the earliest the bill could be brought to the floor is September, that's still 2 months before the midterm elections in November. So that could maybe complicate the timing of the bill because so many members of Congress are seeking re-election. They're preoccupied with that. And there's speculation from some within the military-industrial complex that there could still be incentives for lawmakers in either party to just wait until after the election to see which party is going to have a majority in the next Congress, and that could influence how they participate in this process on a short or long timeline. And there could be a lot of posturing around this, even though in a lot of ways there's already such a convergence between what's in the House bill and what's in the Senate bill. The Senate bill is already $8 billion more than the House version, which was already $37 billion more than the president's request. So there's just a rat race for more spending. At this point, there's probably not more room to consider adding even more funding, but there are all sorts of posturing moves that can happen in later stages of budget processes. So as far as next steps for all of you on this call, others can say more, but beyond the Senate vote, the coalition, the People Over Pentagon Coalition, wants to pivot to continuing to build on the People Over Pentagon Act, which is the Lee-Pocan amendment to cut $100 billion from the military budget. So there's a lot of ongoing relationship building in Congress to try to do better next time. And of course, many groups have complementary efforts happening, like CODEPINK has a campaign to cancel the F-35. If folks want to participate, if you're part of groups that aren't already part of it, the People Over Pentagon Coalition is still working on endorsements for this act. And you can get more info at peopleoverpentagon.org. So with that, I will hand it to the next speaker.
I guess
Here we go.
back to Marcy.
I'm unmuted now. Thank you so much, Ashik Siddique of the National Priorities Project. And before that, we had Lindsay Koshgarian. They're not leaving us yet. They are sticking around while we take some actions. I saw that someone posted in the chat, why are we still trying to appeal to these legislators? We should be engaging in direct actions in front of their office. And, I second that. Please do organize something against the NDAA, voting for this NDAA in front of your senators' offices, since that's the bill will hit the floor, the Senate floor, as Ashik mentioned, possibly as early as September. In the meantime, we do want to at least weigh in. We have some easy, breezy, one-click actions, which Shay and Maha can post in the chat. The first one, I think, is to send a message to your U.S. senators, vote no on the NDAA. And if we could post that and the others, we'll just, we also have, there we go, it's coming up. There we go. So you click on that and you can write a letter. You can use our letter to send to your U.S. senators. We also have another one click, and we're going to take some time to do this. We really want people to do it, to engage, because not only do you send a message to your representatives, but also those who do sign these letters. We have their emails, we have some of their information. And if you're planning something, if you want to be a CODEPINK point person in your congressional district, you can sign up for our CODEPINK Congress Liaison Program that Maha will be organizing. We have about, 75 point people. We need a lot more, over 400 members of the House. So if you're interested in the CODEPINK Congress Liaison Program, you can also, I don't know, Shay, what do you think? Ma, you? You can.
They can contact either of us. I'll put the form to sign up in the chat.
Yeah. So it's an organizing tool as well, but do please send your messages. We're going to take a few moments. So maybe if you have some music, Shay, while people fill this out, we can listen to the music, and then we'll come back for at least 10 minutes of Q&A. Some of you posted terrific questions in the chat. We want to get to those as well. So let's see what we've got. Got no on the NDA, negotiations now, and Ukraine stop provoking China.
I feel like I'm on the set of Casablanca or something, but
I played a kind of down tempo, and I can change it up so people feel energized to sign this petition.
all good.
All right, maybe we'll bring this part to a close and move into our Q&A. And maybe we can find out the nitty-gritty, like how many votes are necessary to pass the 2023 military budget, the NDAA. Lindsay, Ashik?
Yes, so this is a pure majority thing. This is not something that can be filibustered. If you follow the reconciliation votes, the way that they passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the reason they were able to pass that with a simple majority is because it's a budget. Because it was a budget measure. And that's why they took, if you followed this closely and you heard all about the Senate parliamentarian and taking stuff out because it didn't meet the Byrd rule, and I'm just saying a lot of words here, but basically the point is, if it's a budget thing, it can pass with 50 votes. So that is the case with both the NDAA and appropriations. They can pass with a simple majority. In reality, we're not anywhere close to getting 50 votes against the NDAA, unfortunately. So that's not going to be an issue for us for a while, but that's the answer.
Thank you. Cole?
Yeah, I was actually dialoguing a little bit with Lindsay and others in the chat about this question of reps or senators who vote for amendments to cut the number, but then vote for the bill after their amendment loses. How do we read this? My concern is that the leaders who are going to negotiate the final deal, suppose one chamber did cut the number and the other one didn't, but the leaders are going to undermine it and they'll restore, how does that really put pressure? So if you're not willing to vote against the bill, it seems to me you don't really have leverage. So I'd like to know your thoughts about how we read that.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I think the prevailing view, especially among the coalition that Ashik was talking about, the People Over Pentagon Coalition, is that it's a little bit baby steps. We want people to first vote for an amendment. We want them then to vote, for a lower top line or vote against the NDAA. But we need people to take that first step. And then we want to keep, pushing them a little more. So that's the theory. Of course, there are folks who are working on electoral parts of this. That's not us. We aren't legally allowed to do that, but that's important too.
Yes, I think you may have been referring, somebody wrote in the chat, why don't we tell people that we're not going to endorse them, our organizations, our Democratic clubs, our Green, whatever, are not going to make any endorsements or knock on doors for anyone who will vote for this. And that's certainly some leverage that we can apply. What's up with the Sea Launch Cruise Missile? You said that Biden left it out. Congress put it back in. Why? Follow the money. What's going on here?
Why? Yeah, why is a good question. So Biden took it out because it's well, so the military reason is not our reason. It's not that it's necessarily that it's dangerous or that we are, want less militarism in the world. The military reason is that it's redundant. It's not necessary. They have other ways to deliver those missiles. That's the military answer. That's the answer that Biden is listening to when he made that cut. But then there's another military answer. So the interesting thing about the military is, despite its great hierarchy, is that Congress can always find somebody to call in and come and testify and say anything they want. So in this case, they were able to bring in folks to say, no, we really do need this additional weapons system. And there are so many members of Congress who are happy to vote for any additional weapons system, or just happy to go along with something that somebody else wants, right? It's not necessarily that, everyone who supported this has a strong opinion about it, or has something to gain personally. It's just, why not, sort of. So I think that sort of is the answer, even though that it's not a very satisfying one.
Thank you. Cole?
I'm sorry, I spaced. And
Okay, no, while you're working on that, somebody posted, what are the chances that the 2023 NDAA will go directly to a conference committee in the House and not give anyone an opportunity to vote on amendments? And if that happens, what amendments will stay?
Yeah, it's a great question. We don't know. What we're hearing most recently is that the Senate may not go through the whole process, and that they may just come up with an agreement with the House, and then they'll both vote on that agreement version. That would curtail the opportunity for additional amendments, and most likely. But when it comes to which amendments that made it in could be kept, so take the Jacobs amendment I mentioned to make sure that at least 1202 irregular warfare support to proxy forces doesn't go to human rights abusers. Whether or not that makes it into the Senate version is something that will be decided behind closed doors. But that doesn't mean that it's still an opportunity to say something about it. It just might mean that you change who you're saying it to. You might, in that case, it would be more important to target the leadership on this, which is the leadership of the House and Senate Armed Services Committees, and possibly even, party leadership as well. So that's, I think that's how that would be likely to happen. And there will be probably things that Democrats are able to get into a final NDAA that are things, that Republicans will not like, and that would be slightly better, but only slightly better, probably.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. My question, going back to what we were talking about at the top of the hour about Ukraine, about Taiwan and China, for messaging purposes, could we identify weapons spending in there that's either overtly for Ukraine and for Taiwan, or arguably is intended to confront Russia or to confront China? I suppose the whole military budget is in some sense intended to confront Russia and China, but can we isolate some components that would be particularly, targeted that way?
Yeah, it's a good question. On Ukraine, most of the money is happening through these supplemental bills. There's really very, very little in the NDAA for Ukraine. there's like $100 million for training Ukrainian pilots. And, there's like, it's just little tiny pieces.
Mhm.
So not much on Ukraine. I think there are some amendments on, things like who can get the aid in Ukraine and preventing weapons from then being sold on the black market. There are some things like that can happen through the NDAA on Ukraine, but mostly not money. And then on China, yeah, I think it is fair to say that so much of it is based on China and China rivalry that you probably couldn't put a number on it. There is something called the Pacific Deterrence Initiative that has a specific dollar amount, but it's in the low billions. It wouldn't do justice at all to the money that Congress is actually spending to justify this, is actually justifying through this China rivalry.
I want to take a moment just to let everybody know that Medea Benjamin, who often co-hosts CODEPINK Congress, she is our co-host. She has a book coming out called Ukraine Making Sense of a Senseless War. She's going on a book tour this fall. If you want to bring her to your hometown, let Maha know. She's going to be working on the book tour, and we want to get the word out and promote the book. Also, CODEPINK Radio. If you can't hear it in your city, please ask your community radio station, your college radio station to subscribe to CODEPINK Radio. Contact Maha at codepink.org. I'll be interviewing people on this whole Taiwan issue, playing a bit of the war games that were conducted by Meet the Press and NBC with the Center for New American Security, which is a think tank that is thinking about war with China. And so, it doesn't seem, I don't think it's an accident that you have one delegation after another going. A lot of these people from the think tank have high positions in the Biden administration. Okay, back to the NDAA. So what do you think? To recap, what should we do? What are the opportunities here?
I'll say a bit, and then I'll see if Ashik wants to add. So first of all, you're very helpfully asking for the real deal, which is vote no on the NDAA. And that is where this needs to end up. So that's terrific. I do think it's worth fighting for a few of these smaller things, particularly the F-35. If we can get it so that the Pentagon has their F-35 cut by almost a third, that would be a big win. So I think that's something worth paying attention to. I think the 1202 thing is much harder to win, but I think it's something that has potential for public opposition. It's something that people can understand, and I think it also has potential to be something that years down the road is still around and has been used to engage in all kinds of under the radar, completely inappropriate combat. So I think that would be an important one to nip in the bud if we can.
Thank you.
Do you have anything you'd add?
Not really. I think those are strategic things to focus on for now. Otherwise, I think beyond this Senate process, it's important to just keep building the base to do better next year.
That's right. And I wonder, how many people do call or do contact or do drop by, and certainly not enough. When I was in Washington, D.C., I was sitting there, this was a few years ago, talking to somebody, and they said, look around, see all these people in suits? Who are they? They're lobbyists. They're corporate lobbyists. So we need to be particularly loud. Somebody posted in the chat, thank you very much for bringing our attention to the fact that the United Nations is hosting throughout August the 10th review conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. CODEPINK partnered with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. We issued a statement. It's on our CODEPINK website if you want to read it. And the point is that the NDAA, I think what's $30 billion for new nuclear weapons. They call it nuclear modernization, which is a euphemism for nuclear rearmament. So while this conference is going on. The US signed the NPT in 1968. Russia signed it in 1968. Here we are producing new nuclear weapons in open violation of this treaty, while our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, goes on Twitter and says how much he embraces the NPT, how much the US values it. So we have to call them out on this, and also demand that the Biden release his nuclear posture review. It's still classified as far as I know, and that's wrong. The public, the world, we deserve to know what's the plan here with these nuclear weapons. And we certainly don't believe any nuclear war, any use of either short range or long range nuclear weapons is anything less than catastrophic. So, Cole, first, let's all unmute and thank our guests for joining us and for informing us about the process and what's in the bill. And I know I'm not supposed to ask the last question, but is there? I do want to ask one last question. Is there ever an opportunity in the Appropriations Committee to cut the budget that has been authorized?
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Marcy.
Thank you.
I think the ship has sailed.
Okay.
Bravo.
Thank you, true majorities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Keep up the good fight.
It's hopeless.
Oh, no.
Don't say
No, there's
that.
always hope.
It's probably true. Don't say it.
That's right. It's always hope.
Thank you all.
Mobilized. But before you leave,
Thank you.
everybody right now. Before you leave, let us know, is there ever an opportunity to cut this in the Appropriations Committee, which, as you said, is different than the House Armed Services, the Senate Armed Services. So tell us about that.
So yes, then that's an important avenue for us to look at. What's interesting, the House appropriations did not cut the military budget in their bill that the House Defense Appropriations Committee didn't cut it in their bill that they put forward, but they did stick to the Biden number. They didn't add anything, which is different from what the House or Senate Armed Services Committees did, but they added a whole ton. And that's, it has everything to do with who's leading that committee and who's on that committee. So it's absolutely something to work for. We also need to work on the NDAA. They both have to work in order for this to work. Although if the appropriators don't appropriate the money, it can't be spent. So it wouldn't matter that the NDAA said there's this much money. If it's not appropriated, it can't be spent. So appropriations is ultimately what it comes down to. But again, it's just a question of building piece by piece that big enough body of support in Congress to actually win one of these things. I do want to just mention on the subject of committees, it matters a tremendous amount who's on these committees. On the Senate Armed Services Committee, there was one vote against moving the NDAA out of committee. It was Elizabeth Warren. She was the only one out of 58, I think. So it matters who's there. If there were more progressives on that committee, we'd be a little closer to where we need to be. So it's not just who's in Congress, it's also who's, in what places in Congress.
So Patrick Leahy, he's chair of the the Senate Appropriations Committee, yeah? I believe
Senate Appropriations, yeah, but Senate Armed Services is where there was.
But he's retiring, so there's an opportunity maybe, right, to push for somebody who will challenge this.
Usually there's somebody just in line, and that happens somewhat automatically. But it's always worth a try.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lindsay Koshgarian, Ashik Siddique of the National Priorities Project. We're going to close now with a few announcements. Cole, Mary Ellen, thank you so much for co-hosting. If you have any announcements, now would be the time.
I'll just put up a couple. Can I share? Yes, I can share. So we are launching a new campaign here in Napa. Stop Raytheon's nukes. Raytheon is the #2 war profiteer. They are Massachusetts born and bred. However, we are so sorry to see them leave. They're moving to Virginia. where they can be closer to their only customer or their primary customer. But we are going to come after them for their role in nuclear weapons. So we've got a launch event next week. And then the second one I wanted to mention is we have a book discussion on Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's new book, Not a Nation of Immigrants, which picks apart the whole settler, colonialist, and white supremacy history of the United States. The book discussion doesn't kick off until October because we're giving you time to read the book, but you can sign up and start reading. Back to you, Mercy.
Thank you, Cole. And I would just like to remind everyone that we welcome your participation in our Peace in Ukraine Coalition. Negotiate, do not escalate, no more weapons. We will be having a call tomorrow at 1:30 Pacific time, 4:30 Eastern time. And if you'd like to be on that call and be on the listserv, let maha@codepink.org know. Also earlier, please do save the chat, 3 dots at the bottom of your screen, just click on that, save chat. We posted some Google groups, one to volunteer to be a Code Pink liaison in your congressional district. And we'll give you support for organizing delegations, meetings, direct actions, and so forth. The other Google group was to specifically volunteer, step up, yes, on this week of action in September, the 12th through the 15th, to organize a meeting with your House or Senate reps, to be outside their offices. We've got signs you can download from our website. We can make it easy, but we do want to be out there and visible and let people know that we do not support a protracted proxy war in Ukraine, nor do we want to go to war against China. That is insane. That is madness. So everybody, let's be loud, speak up, make good trouble. With that, I say good night, and I look forward to seeing you the first and third Tuesdays of the month for more of Code Pink Congress. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.